to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, our topic is attack. First of all, when we have a position in front of us, we need to determine what type of position it is. Is it a position where the opponent's king is in a vulnerable position and therefore an attack is justified? Or is it more of a positional, strategical type of position where we want to, let's say, increase our space advantage or improve the positioning of our pieces and target some weak square or weak pawn? Well, in our two examples in this lesson, it's certainly going to be the king who is targeted. Well, let's get to the first example. Here we are. And this is a famous game played in the candidates match between Jan Timman and Artur Yusupov back in 1992. One of the things that come to mind immediately is that Black has played g6, that is, once upon a time Jan chatted his bishop, and that bishop is already gone. In situations especially where the other side still has a dark squared bishops and queens on the board, that's certainly a red flag and a call for an attack. If white would successfully get a bishop and a queen to that long dark square diagonal, that could be certainly a very dangerous scenario for black. Of course, in this case, that's easier said than done, because on one hand white has a pawn on c3 and also a pawn on e5 that's kind of in the way. But nevertheless, those weakened dark squares around the black king are certainly obvious. The question is, how can white take advantage of it? Naturally, the only way, if the white dark squared bishop succeeds in attacking those squares and then eventually getting the queen's help in the attack. So why don't you think a little bit and come up with a game plan what you would do if you would play with the white pieces right now. Then come back and look how Timman won the game in just about a dozen moves. The game continued with white playing rather aggressively and immediately opening the diagonal of the bishop to appear on h6. White doesn't even mind giving a pawn up to achieve this goal. Black responded by indeed capturing the pawn, and the white bishop arrived on h6. Now, white has very specific threats. On one hand, naturally, the bishop is attacking the rook on f8, but even more dangerously, white is about to trade the bishop for the knight, and once the black knight no longer guards the g3 square, the white queen appears there with a check and follows it up with a checkmate on g7. So for example, I'm talking about if rook moves away from the attack, bishop takes, let's say bishop takes, queen g3, king h8, and game over with queen g7. So that's the game plan. The question is, what can black do to avoid this? Well, the sad news for black is that not all that much. Black either needs to allow the bishop takes knight, what we just saw, or give up on his rook that's on f8. Naturally, getting checkmated is a worse scenario, so that's why black rather moved the king out of the way and gave up on the exchange on the rook on f8. White went for it, bishop captured rook, queen captured back, and now we're in a technical phase of the game where white has a moderate material advantage and needs to convert it to a full point. Let's see how Timman did it. Next, white captured on d6, when now naturally black better captures back with the knight. Otherwise, if the pawn captures to d6, black would be stuck with a whole bunch of isolated pawns all around, and that certainly wouldn't be a good thing. So instead, black rather captured back with the knight, a better choice. And now white has various ways, of course, to improve the position or to continue, but white played rook b1, putting pressure on black's pawn on b6. And black knight returned to e4, trying to maintain as many pieces on the board as possible. And white was in no rush to capture the pawn on b6 and attacked it a second time, wants to capture it under his own conditions. Black responded with queen g7, and now not only that white captures the pawn on b6, but also attacks black's knight on a5. Queen captured c3, protecting that very knight, and now came bishop takes knight. Now black is kind of in a pin situation. If the bishop takes, the rook is hanging, or if the pawn takes after fe, white can safely capture the pawn on f7, as now black cannot capture the knight, because then check and checkmate arrives. It's always important to be aware of checking possibilities of yourself and of course of your opponents. So after bishop e4, neither capture is very good for black. That's why black captured white's knight instead right away. But now simply comes rook f5, came knight c4, check. This is a fork. Now black of course could have resigned already. Right now white could capture simply the black knight and be up a rook, but white chose the fancy way and captured the pawn, sacrificing a rook, because if pawn takes, queen takes, actually checkmate arrives by force in just 2 more moves, or 3, check, and rook takes, and black is dead. So let's go back one more time and look at the position after the rook sacrifice, where black didn't accept it but responded by playing e5. And now again queen takes knight was just fine, but white again chose the fancy way by playing queen a7. And now finally a simple move, queen takes bishop, and black felt it's time to resign. Certainly, being a rook down, it's not too early. And now I'd like to share with you a game that was recently played between 2 of today's greatest champions, Veselin Topalov and Vishy Anand. Let's look at this position that they have reached after white's 19th move. Again, the first thing that comes into mind is, what on earth is the white king doing still in the middle of the board at move 19, with both rooks already having moved, which obviously means that white lost the right to castle. So white is not in a happy situation there. However, the question is, from black's perspective, how to take advantage of it. Well, this is one of those examples when a threat can be more annoying or dangerous than the actual execution. While black certainly could right now immediately capture on f3 and win a pawn, that would only be temporary, as now white would make a fork on 2 of the black rooks, although it's not only on those 2 pieces, because white also threatens to win a pawn on h6. And while black could sacrifice the rook, and then if queen takes rook, come in with rook b2, that would be real nice for black. And even queen g4 wouldn't save the day, because check and checkmate arrives. However, white was certainly in no necessity to capture the rook on d7. So what we were talking about is the trade on f3, take, queen c6, rook b8, a real tricky move, and this is when white is not forced to capture the black rook, but can instead choose to capture on h6. The point of this move is not that only white won a pawn, but white immediately threatens with checkmate and therefore keeps black busy in defending that threat. So black would have to play g6, for example, and then white would get to trade queens after queen f4, and even if black has, of course, a nice position with a superior pawn structure right here, it is very far from a won game. So let's go back to the very beginning and think, if not immediately bishop takes knight, what else may black try here? Vishy Anand here continued with an excellent move, bringing the rook into the game immediately with rook e8. And this is one of those typical situations when black is increasing the pressure on the white position, and more specifically on the white king. Just brings one more piece into the game. So now it's white's turn. Question is what to do next. In such situations, trading queens would be a dream come true from white's perspective. However, sadly for white, it did remain a dream for the rest of the game. The first thing to look at is what happens if white right now plays knight e5, a very natural looking move that immediately attacks the black rook and also threatens to trade the knight for the bishop on g4, which certainly would be a good deal for white. However, here black has a surprise sacrifice. Black can do better than just moving his rook away. Black, in fact, will now sacrifice the rook for white's knight. White takes back, and black finally opens files by playing d4. So now white has trouble. That pawn on one hand in some cases threatens to capture on e3, and in others the pawn just may move forward to d3 and create a threat of a fork with d2. So white is in a real serious situation. For example, if white now plays h3, black could trade on e3. After queen takes, black continues with check. King f1, queen b5 check, king e1, and rook d3. We can see the clear cooperation between all three of the black pieces. And let's say queen e4, queen b2, and all of a sudden there are just too many threats for white to deal with them all. A very nice variation. Let's go back a little bit and see some other alternatives. So we were in this position with rook e8, and we were looking at the situation after knight e5, when black indeed immediately would trade and then follow it up by playing d4. And if h3, again intermediate move, black wouldn't move the bishop right away but would take on e3. And now we saw the other variation where the white queen captures on e3. Let's now see what happens if white captures back with the pawn. Well, then the black rook will move to d3 now, continuing the attack. King f2, and now bishop takes h3. Sacrifice to open the second rank, check, king g3, and now a quiet but killer move, h5, threatening to checkmate with the pawn. On the other hand, if the white pawn tries to block that, that will allow the checkmate with queen g4. White's position is lost, therefore. So let's go back to the beginning of this game and see what happened after rook e8. White So I guess most of these possibilities after knight e5 and then rook e5, and therefore chose a different option by playing queen b5 right now, with the idea that if bishop f3, then to take the rook on d7 and not necessarily the bishop. Therefore, black regrouped. Simply move the rook back to the 8th rank. Now the two rooks protect each other, and the rook that just moved is about to appear on the b file, which is a very key, important file, in fact the only open file where black can enter and get perhaps to the 2nd rank. Also, black is threatening to capture on f3 at the right moment. White now continued by retreating the queen, trying to get on defense and protect the knight on f3. The problem is that there is even material. Black didn't need it to sacrifice anything to get to such a superior position where a white king cannot castle and black has a clear initiative. Black responded with rook b8, taking control of that only open file, and in such situation, if kind of white does nothing, just kind of waits, black would be just doubling the rooks and then get a rook to b2, which would lead to further gains. Therefore, white was pushing the issue and played h3, attacking black's bishop. So now black needs to decide to trade or not to trade. Fortunately for black, there was some little tactical tricks that supported to trade on f3, with the idea that if now the white queen trades back, then black would be ready to immediately capture a pawn on d4, and then again, in addition to the attack, black would also have an extra pawn, which never hurts. So white at least was trying to maintain the material balance and took back with the g pawn, which by the way has two other potential ideas also. One is that by opening the g file, white may create counterattack by, let's say, getting the queen there to the g file. Or, alternatively, if white gets the time and the opportunity, may move the king from e1, kind of castle artificially, and get the king to f1 and g2 and maybe to the corner to h1. As we shall see, that will remain a dream for white in this game. Black now just moved the queen back to f5, on one hand attacking the pawn on h3, and on the other hand simply maintaining the pressure on the f3 pawn, as well as keeping an eye on the important b1 square. Right now, if white responds by protecting that pawn, white would play rook b1, and if king d1, just doubling up and continue with the pressure. So after queen f5, white continued right now f4, and black follows up the plan with rook b1. Black doesn't mind that this means an exchange of rooks, because the attack continues naturally in this position. Black does not trade queens, because then things would turn around all of a sudden. White would be just fine. It's very important to keep the queens on the board, or only allow the exchange of queens if that will result material gain, like here, queen b1, of course, black would take back, and that would be a skewer, winning white's rook. So white had to try to run, king e2, and now at this stage, that naturally no trading of queens, but making sure there is no exchange. Queen f5, queen retreated, attacking the pawn on h3, and also the rook b2 is coming. White protected the pawn on h3, and rook b2 check arrived, king f3, and h5. This is one of those situations when we can see a little pawn becoming an active participant and in fact an attacking piece. And, well, you have to use what you have. We only have limited amount of pieces left on the board, So therefore black is using that little h-pawn to his advantage. In the meantime, white played a4, trying to get that pawn away from danger, but danger was worse after queen e4, check, king g3, and here it comes, h4. White captured, king h4, and came rook f2. So we still have material balance. However, we can see that the white king is certainly not in an enviable position on h4. When there are still queens and rooks on the board, this is not a good sign at all. White played queen g4, but after rook g2, it was game over. Certainly had to be a sad memory for Topalov, who ended up losing the last game of the World Championship match in Sofia in 2010, also in a position with white having the king on h4. Now the problem is the black queen is about to attack the white king either by queen h7 or queen e7, depending where the white queen goes. And here comes our final example in this lesson that could be called the jewel of the week. Even though this position has been reached in a real game, and it was white's turn. The first move is already surprising. Before I show you the solution, I'd like you to spend a few minutes and trying to see what game plan you would come up with. Well, it seems that black has a whole bunch of pawns. In fact, black has all of the 8 pawns still on the board. However, the hunt gets started. White, first of all, played knight b5, a very powerful move, attacking black's d6 pawn. Of course, if takes, it's a breakthrough. The pawn, one of the pawns, either A or the B, will get promoted. So therefore, black responded with king e7, protecting the pawn. But white doesn't give up the chase so easily and continued with rook h8. Now the idea is to capture the bishop and then of course to go after that b7 pawn and to promote one of the A or B pawns. Black responded with bishop c4. And now white pretty much achieved the goal with the check, and now when king moves, the pawn on b7 is hanging. Or alternatively, if black blocks the check, white would make a little sacrifice with knight d6 and then grab black's bishop and a couple more pawns on the way. Well, black by all means wanted to hang on to that d6 pawn, but had to pay an even bigger price, namely checkmate with knight c7. Well, I hope you enjoyed this beautiful endgame and the other examples of the lesson. Got some ideas on how to get to the opponent's king that you can use in your own games in the future. Thank you for listening, and so long until next time. Bye-bye.